actually have a picture.
Yeah, crisp is on the stove if you wanted a sample.
I'm gonna get to that quick in a second. Man, fall is really here, isn't it?
Is this your book?
I actually did like that.
That is
Years
very
ago.
well.
This is the first 3 chapters deal with all of the discovery sites. In other words, you know, when you get involved with any of them, you can get bogged down in a lot of the detail. And of course, Ron was, you know, he was discovering them as he went along. When you go to this site and go directly to another site, and pressing deal here, there, and whatnot. But it wasn't until we kind of stepped back and took a collective view of what was happening. You know, why Noah's Ark, why Sodom and Gomorrah, why the Red Sea crossing, why Mount Sinai. So it wasn't until we kind of stepped back and looked at them collectively that we realized that collectively something was going on. And that's really the first 3 chapters of that book deals with. And then of course it ends, Patrick, if you want. Ends with a concept of, well, the Ark of the Covenant is kind of the one that's the most controversial. Because I can take you to all the other sites, and you can walk on, touch and smell and taste them. Let's look at South Florida.
You taste the hot light?
Yeah. Well, I did a program. I did a Skype interview with one of the YouTube guys last week on Sodom and Gomorrah. I had some samples there, and I did have the Bible said that if those sites were real, ash, brimstone, salt, evidence of burning, no one would live there, nothing would grow there. And they're the 6 criteria, and there are 5 locations in the world that those things exist. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Sodom, and so on.
All the cities have.
So anyway, I tasted. I even said you can even taste the salt. You know? And I saw somebody commented on there. Rose, did you look at the comments from that program?
Which one?
The one we did last week? Somebody commented about me tasting the salt.
Oh,
They said, must be kind of cool tasting dead Canaanites. Something like that.
yeah, that's pretty clever.
The sulfur balls that you guys found, it's like pure sulfur. That was super interesting.
Yeah, I got a
He's got a couple
case
of them.
there. Case there, you can look at them like.
They're here.
Yeah.
What? This
Okay,
box?
you got another 10 minutes.
They're this is Noah's Ark stuff here.
Right. This is it.
Yeah, ash,
Mm-hmm.
brimstone or sulfur, crushed powdered sulfur,
Got some more of those cookies left.
salt.
Oh, okay. How
Yeah,
is
it's
it
burnt.
very much? A little too dry for me.
No one lives there.
Be careful how
Nothing
much you
grows
do.
there.
Your dad
These are
liked it.
pictures of the place.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how distinctive, how bright that is compared to the mountains in the background.
Yeah. That's super interesting.
Yeah, and then.
And these are the exact places where the Bible described this would take
Oh yeah,
place.
these samples are 3,900 years old. This event occurred 3,900 years ago. But you can see, looking at this picture here, how you have the terrain all around, the mountains all around. You have buildings. They're all ash. They're all turned to ash. You go up and you can pinch off some of it.
I wonder if that works any better.
They were just throwing him like talcum powder. I had vehicles out here I was using to.
Close enough, is it?
Huh?
This is really cool.
This is an example. That's not from.
Now the reason why we put that in there, the timber is also laminated.
It's your
In
For Noah's Ark, yeah.
In three different main sections. They say microscopically, there are 6 layers there.
Mm-hmm.
But I put this there to show one primary difference. You see this is laminated right here.
Mm-hmm.
Dendrochronology wasn't because
because there were no seasonal changes. So you didn't have the growth rings in the wood.
Mhm.
So if somebody like the Chinese years ago came down and they said, we found Noah's Ark, oh man, but as soon as I saw the wood, I knew it wasn't pre-flood construction because the wood had growth rings in it.
Mm.
And growth rings are a post-flood phenomenon because you didn't have the seasonal changes before the flood. Never rained.
Huh.
The earth was one uniform temperature. It had canopy around it. It was like a hyperbaric chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had greater oxygen, greater pressure, so things grew much larger. The animals, the trees, the people, of course.
And that's not just a Bible thing, that's a science thing, right? Like
It's
we
a
know
science.
that it definitely didn't rain 4,000
Well,
years ago.
the Bible verifies that the earth had a canopy around it. You know, like Saturn. You know, Saturn had rings and stuff. I mean, well, we had a canopy. This was like a greenhouse down here on the planet. More technically, a hyperbaric chamber because the atmosphere was squeezed down, greater pressure. A hyperbaric chamber puts you at greater pressure, and it basically forces oxygen into your tissues.
Okay.
So that's
Meaning much healthier
So that's the
growth
whole
and
planet was set up that way. During the flood, the canopy, that's where all the rain came. The rain, the 40 days and nights of rain came from the deterioration of the canopy. It was an ice canopy. You know, it was, probably 70 miles up or so. So it was ice. But as it deteriorated and fell, it of course turned into rain, torrential rain. But most of the water came from the underwater aquifers on the planet. Just like your engine in your car has a water sleeve through it, the planet has a water sleeve all around it. And because of that water sleeve and the canopy, the whole planet was one universal temperature. And that's why in the archaeological record we find palm trees in Antarctica, and we find tropical animals in Siberia and things like that. I mean, hard.
Yeah, they found like
There's a lot of science that if you connect it right, proves everything that the Bible talks about. All the geology on the planet is a result of the flood. The fracturing of the tectonic plates, the atmosphere that we deal with today, all the volcanoes, the earthquakes, the hurricanes. I mean, everything that
It's all from all that water.
everything that the secular media wants to say, or it's global warming or it's climate change. Well, the reason why it's climate change is because of the flood. And people, I laugh because people. It began 4,350 years ago.
Wait, so you don't think that we're contributing to that at all? The climate change?
Minuscule.
Minuscule?
There might be a minuscule. Listen, one volcanic eruption does more than all of the vehicles in the world could do.
In terms of carbon dioxide?
Carbon affecting the atmosphere.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
And there are 50 active volcanoes on the planet right now.
I didn't think about
40 to
that.
50. So,
I mean,
listen, the volcano goes off, man. They got to reroute air traffic. They've got to do all kinds of things. I mean, I'm just saying, and we had none of that before the flood. The earth was created perfectly. God caught it very good, and it was in perfect balance. Well, the flood even caused us to begin to wobble through space, and so
That's one of the things we believe why our Earth is kind of tilted in its axis for its rotation. That's not like.
you told me that you have a picture of a jawbone that you picked up from one of the Andaluvians.
Yeah,
Or Andaluvians.
about twice the size of our heads.
Yeah. Do you still have that picture?
I might be able to find it. It might go on a computer somewhere.
I know you had it somewhere kind of buried away under a lot of stuff, so.
But there have been all kinds of large remains found, even in this country. And when I say large remains, I'm talking about skeletons that are 8 to 10 feet in length, in height. That's,
Well, also the ones that we found that
but
are
a
like
10-foot
15 or 16.
person is a 10-foot person would be somebody post-flood, somebody that lived after the flood.
They're bigger pre-flood, right?
Pre-flood bigger. Yeah, Noah. Well, this bone here, this phalange bone here, was taken from where Mrs. Noah's sarcophagus was dug up. Okay, her sarcophagus was 18 feet long.
What's the sarcophagus?
A stone coffin.
Yeah,
Stone
tomb.
coffin. Stone
It
coffin.
was how big?
18 feet long.
That's a big coffin.
For a big lady. She
Big
was
lady.
probably about 15 and a half feet tall.
Wow.
But they were in perfect balance. I mean, what this bone shows that they were 10 times the mass. Right. So if you're 200 pounds, right, and you look pretty balanced, pretty normal, pretty in proportion, they would have been much bigger, but they would have been 2,000 pounds.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing.
Imagine the muscle mass for that.
Yes.
And whereas you might live to be 90 or 100, they live to be 900.
Yeah.
Yeah, Noah died at 950. His wife died before him because we found the grave markers over there. And
That's what I was trying to tell you about, was the grave markers and stuff, and that's why we kind of believed it was their family.
Yeah, so I was confused about that because he was telling me that. So you found the grave markers. What does that mean? Like you found
where they were buried, where they were
buried.
Right. Yeah.
And you guys haven't found the actual graves, but you found like the markings of it described in the Bible.
Well, we know where the graves are. Yeah.
You do.
And Mrs. Noah's was dug up. That's why
Mrs.
we ended up with little bones. Well, that's why we ended up with jawbones and huge femurs and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And, over in Turkey, it's a different culture, different climate. The areas that we're talking about, which would be Eastern Turkey, are pretty much Muslim or Arab in their descent, and so they have certain superstitions and things of this nature as well. But they also the radicals oppose Christianity. In fact, back in 1900, I don't know if you guys probably aren't aware, but in the U.S. government every year, the Congress tries to pass a bill that goes through the Senate or Congress where they try to deal with the Holocaust that occurred in Armenia. It's called the Armenian Holocaust.
Oh, I know all about it. I'm 14. I had to learn about it.
Okay, all right. So back in the turn of the century, over there, the Armenians actually lived in that area, Eastern Turkey. And so they were basically, the Muslims came and just slaughtered them primarily because they were Christian.
Really?
Yeah, the Byzantine Christians and the Armenians.
Are they Orthodox? I thought they were Catholic.
Well, they were different than.
They were like Orthodox or something.
Yeah, Orthodox, but they were different than the Muslims, and so the Muslims rousted them, annihilated them.
Hi, this is Sarkis.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you. I'm Elijah.
Are you his brother?
Yeah.
I can tell. You look just like Sam.
Okay.
Yeah. So now we know you're
Nice
a
to meet you.
lion.
Elza.
Elza.
That's my
Yes,
wife.
Also, I don't know if you mind or not, you're welcome to sit there, but you're still on camera for the stream. If you don't want to be, you're welcome to sit somewhere else if you'd like, or I just figured I'd mention it if you're uncomfortable.
What are we talking about?
We streamed the studies, and so he was just saying if you don't want to be on camera,
Yeah,
then you
you're
can
not
sit
comfortable
anywhere
like being
else.
streamed or whatever. It's not
I
gonna.
mean, I really don't care. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm taking
it's
somebody's seat.
No, you're not.
You don't have Floyd on yours.
You're not taking nobody's seat.
Yeah, you're good.
Well,
I just figured I'd mention it.
after you guys are done with this study, I'm definitely gonna pick your brain on this stuff because part of the reason I came here is because I want, I'm just getting into this. I'm just now giving Christianity a chance of all the weird stuff that's been happening recently.
Sure.
Sterling was trying to say that he thinks that God is trying to make a connection with me, and I'm starting to believe it big time because of, again, just all the, how God is, just all the signs that he puts
Well,
me
that's
past.
like I said, the Holy Spirit is out there confronting the world. You're part of the world. You're part of humanity. So of course, and
It's always reaching.
he's always reaching out because eternal existence, eternal life or death is at stake. This world it's a temporary place. We're just passing through. God is gonna come and recreate and make this world better than it was in the past, but it'll be modeled after the same thing he created.
That's what I was chatting about with my buddy. I was helping my buddy Jason and Joe on a roof the other day.
Mhm.
And he was asking questions about heaven, and he was like, "What do you think it'll be like?" And he was asking if there will still be hunting in heaven. He likes to hunt, so he was like, "I was like,
It was Joe or
it was Joe." Yeah, Jason doesn't really hunt, but
I can see Joe hunting.
Joseph was like, "Will there be hunting in heaven?" And I was like, I don't think so. I was like, at least not the same way. I was like, you might maybe tag with
Yeah.
animals, like you can go chase a leopard through
I'd
the
say-
jungle.
I'd say, Joe, don't come up and give you.
Yeah, but you won't be eating them, and
I
I
was told Joseph, don't come up and give you a big old kiss on the cheek.
right.
That is an interesting contradiction when you think about it, because the whole concept behind heaven is supposed to be the place where you pretty much get to do whatever you want, right? Like,
It's not whatever you want. It's whatever.
It's what-
it's whatever.
it's
in cooperation with the will of God. I
Right.
mean,
Obviously
we
not killing.
can't relate to a place where there's no animosity,
No death,
no struggle,
no pain.
no death, no disease, no pain,
Mhm.
no anything that we typically deal with down there. We can't even imagine. That's what Scripture says. You know, the mind. You know, I've not seen, earth not heard, it's not even entered into your imagination. The goodness, you know, that God has. I mean, and just an atmosphere that's charged with such frequency that it energizes you. It builds you up instead of tearing. You know, you talked about, you know, us contributing to, you know, climate change and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
The things that we do, we pollute the air, we pollute the water, and things of that nature to some extent.
Please.
I thought I was gonna be the only one to laugh at that. Good to know.
We're a family that likes to laugh, and we laugh inappropriately a lot of times. So that's just life with us.
We don't have any of that in heaven. Heaven is pure. It's perfectly balanced. You're synonymous with nature. You're part of it, you know, but you
More
don't have all
symbiotic.
the detrimental things that we deal with today.
That was the only other thing
It's a
he asked
symbiotic
was
relationship.
Very
he
symbiotic.
asked about race cars, and he was like, "Could I have a race car in heaven?" I was like,
I'd say, Joe, we'll put you in the car. I'll just fly.
"Yeah."
I just had a thought that occurred.
just
Is there gonna be comedy in heaven? Because because the thing is, good comedy is based in pain. You know, like at some point or another. You know, like most of it anyway.
Every
So
time
that's
that you
interesting.
laugh, there are endorphins that are released in your system. And endorphins make you feel good.
And joy can make you laugh too.
And, right, and make you, I mean, so
Yeah.
laughter is healing.
Mhm.
right?
I laugh
So-
watching the grandkids when Timmy sends me videos of Gabe doing something. I laugh because I just think they're beautiful.
So the question is, how much healing will go on in the new world? And that's something that's been actually debated about. You know, the Bible talks about us kind of growing up. For example, granddad
Oh, the 6-year-old standing in the park with his dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there'll be, well, like I said, the Bible really pictures. Of course, it talks about eternity, but which we can't understand. But because we're finite, so that's just the whole realm that we can say. We can say the word, but we can't really grasp the true meaning of it because we're finite. And we can't even really think about a place that has no pain, no suffering, no
That's
death, no
nice.
trouble, no turmoil. We can't think of a place where there's no confrontations that would be, you know, ugly. We can't think of never really experiencing, you know, atherosclerosis and cancer and arthritis. You know, you're going to be given a new body that will be able to handle eternity. You know. So,
I wanted to ask you one more thing. How do you know that is Mrs. Noah?
I'll share that with you later, but we need to get going right
Yeah.
now.
We got a cliffhanger.
Cool. Cliffhanger, yeah.
We got people.
Tune
that
in
are out
next
there.
week
Tune in
to
after the
find out.
broadcast.
We got people
Yeah.
that are out there. We'll be willing to share that. So let's go ahead and get started with prayer, and we'll see if we can make it do the edited edition. Okay. Father, blessings to us. You've preserved us yet through another week, and we want to thank you for all your many blessings that have come our way, and even the challenges that you have presented to us. We know that everything that you do is good, and it keeps us on track, and so we're thankful for all the challenges that do come. And as we come today, we want to praise you for who you are, the sovereign of the universe, the creator, the sustainer, the redeemer. And Father, we just want to ask that as we open your book, open the Bible, that your Spirit will be here to inspire, to instruct, to guide and direct, to help prepare us for what lies ahead. And we know that you're coming soon, and we want to be ready for that time. So just do what has to be done in our lives to prepare us for those times. And we ask this all in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen. And we want to ask the same blessing of all those that are tuning in, of course.
We've got our usual crowd this morning.
You must say your own
Scott,
prayers.
Dan, and Susan.
Yeah, we got people from Canada, cousins from Canada, and people from basically around the United States and even around the world that either watch it live, because obviously time zones change, and then some that go and watch the archived program afterward. It's just basically a Bible study that we do.
What's this being streamed on?
On our website
Yeah.
and
Website,
YouTube.
Home Church,
It's on
YouTube.
to our YouTube channel.
Home Church
Facebook.
It gets streamed on Facebook, Roku. Still? Is it still?
Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
Roku still.
Yeah.
We have prayer. I usually have a little introduction about things, and then we go. It Elijah leads us out into study right now. And
It's not always me, but it has been me for several
Yeah,
weeks.
Yeah, we switch
now.
off between me,
Yeah,
Elijah,
when we
and
talk
Dan.
about Job, maybe you can lead.
Sure, I'll lead out from Job.
So, we've been going through some of the Old Testament books, First and Second Kings, Chronicles, places that people, even a lot of Christians, don't usually venture into. They usually stay out of. But there's a lot of insight, that you pick up going through that. We, of course, my hot button was hit last week because of the scriptures that talk about them sacrificing their children. Part of ancient heathenistic culture to appease the gods or to honor the gods, little g, in some way, was to take newborn kids and sacrifice them, burn them alive, which was absolutely horrendous. But the thing of it is, we in our progressive modern society, we think we're better off, but we're just as heinous because we don't kill them after they're born now, we kill them before they're born, and it's just ludicrous to think that, I mean they're really, from a biblical standpoint, there is no argument, there's no discussion about killing children, innocent children. It's just abominable. In fact, God calls it an abomination. But we read scriptures where God had to remind his people, his own people, please don't do what the heathen do. Please don't sacrifice your children on the altar of Moloch. Please don't do that. Because they ended up becoming influenced by a lot of the surrounding nations, and they ended up doing it anyway. And of course, because of that, God had to judge them over and over and over again for things that they just would not stay away from, that were an abomination to him. And we in modern society, there's nothing new under the sun, Solomon said, and we're just the same way. We have a whole Democratic Party. I don't care if the Democrats did 1,000 wonderful things for humanity and society. They stand on a platform of promoting the killing of children. And there's just no way that I think any sane person, certainly any Christian, could vote for Democrats who stand on that platform of promoting the killing of babies. There's just no way that you would want to be a part of that or associated with any organization that promotes that. And it's just ludicrous to think that over the last, since the Roe v. Wade decision in 73, life is so precious because every person that is conceived because God allowed that conception to take place. He knew about it. He planned for it. He chose. When you were conceived, for example, there were 500 million possibilities. God said, "I want you." So the first race you ever ran, you won.
Swam.
The first race you ever swam, you won. Okay.
Swam.
But there were 500 million. There were 500 million other possibilities that you were running, that you were competing against. God said,
I was a good swimmer.
"I want you."
Once upon a time.
You see, that's why the
We
devil
had to
works so
practice
hard to try to distract you and deceive you,
190 pounds.
because he doesn't want you to experience eternal life. God chose you in the very beginning, like he chose me and Elijah and Simeon. All of us. He chose all of us, right? And he has a special plan for us. But we get so distracted and so wrapped up into heathenistic traditions and cultures that we don't take time to see what the book says. And what the book says is that you are special. You were created special. Like God says that he even knew you before you were born, And he tries. He has to he has to play within the realm of righteousness and holiness. He has to play in that realm, in that camp. He can't venture out of there to try to woo you back. You see?
You mean like by deception or
Yeah, he
deceit?
can't
Like
try
he
to
has to play
deceive
by
you
the.
into coming back his way.
He's got to play by the
He
rules.
has to play by the rules, where the devil can just do almost anything to try to deceive and distract. So, if people would recognize that there's only one of you, one of me, one of Elijah, one of Simeon, one of Elijah, there's only one of us in all of God's creation. You're truly unique, right? There's nobody like you. You know,
Never has
you
been.
may find
never
somebody
will be.
that looks like you maybe in appearance, you may find someone that thinks like you on certain things, but there is not another you. Totally distinctive, totally unique. Well, what should we do with people that are so unique? How should we treat some? I mean, we take paintings and we take coins and we take cars and we put them in controlled environments, you know, we go ooh and ah and we do all this and they're so valuable because they're rare. Well, the rarest thing on the entire planet is each person. And what do we do with them? A lot of times we treat them like trash. We kill them before they're even born. I mean, how insane is that, right? So, we don't think about how we should treat people because they are so special and unique.
Not to mention how we treat people and what conditions we let people go through just for the thriving of other people.
For our own advantage.
You know, just like
I mean,
people that are loaded rich in this world, and then for the sake of, and other people are suffering at their hand, just so they can have a good life.
Absolutely. And that's just because of sin. Sin makes you self-centered, right? Bible, of course, talks a lot about the being self-centered, And God says He wants us to die daily to self. That's the total opposite. The Bible promotes the opposite of being self-centered, because when you're self-centered, you don't really care what somebody else thinks. You don't care what somebody else does, as long as you get yours, as long as you can climb to the top. Don't matter how many people you got to climb over or climb on top of, how many people you got to depress, how many people you've got to treat cruelly or use, as long as you get yours. And when you look at Western society, we see that. One of the reasons last week when we talked about, we did the program with Sodom and Gomorrah, one of their sins was that they had a corrupt welfare system. The Bible says, it doesn't say it like that, the Bible says they didn't strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy, right? But that was a corrupt welfare system. You can enslave people by giving them things, by handing things out to them. You can control them. You can say, hey, I'm going to give you this, you vote for me, right? We have a whole party that does that buys votes by promising to hand things out to them. And you can control the way people live and think just by saying I'm going to give you stuff.
As long as you see things my way.
Instead of saying, let me teach you how to become self-reliant. Let me teach you how to do for yourself. Instead of giving you fish, let me give you a fishing pole and show you how to fish, right? So you can catch for yourself. So you can have that self-worth that comes in you providing for yourself and your own family. The Bible promotes that. The Bible promotes self-sufficiency to the point where we must realize we must depend wholly on God alone. You see, we can't depend on one another. We can't depend on our job, our treasure, our money, or anything. We can only depend on God. All that's going to go away. The Bible talks about that. That's all going to go away at some point. At any rate, it's my rambling. I could keep going on for a long time, but
you and me both.
It's. I think that God allows people to get to the place where they see all of the nonsense, and they say to themselves, "You are a child of God, and that you can be an ambassador for the kingdom. You can represent the kingdom of God on this sinful world by utilizing the character of Christ." And the character of Christ was one about being a servant. That's something that you really need to get their head around. They're servants. We provide for them. We give them a paycheck. They're not a royalty. They're not over us. They're our servants, and they should serve us faithfully. And of course, that's something that's been lost sight of and something that they don't know anything about. They think we're all the pawns. We serve them, and that's really not true. But Christ came. He said, "I came to save sinners," and he was going to serve with that mindset. And so everywhere he went, he would be healing people, encouraging people, just giving of himself constantly, every day, all the time, from morning till noon. And what was the attitude of the people that were in charge? And why did they hate him? Because he was winning the hearts of the average person, of the lepers, of the people that were that he cured from diseases, of the people that listened to his words of hope and encouragement.
He's taking away our workers.
Well, the leadership back then, they had a perception of who Christ was and how the Messiah would come. They had the promise of the Messiah, but they didn't realize God's plan, and they unfortunately had a warped understanding of what his answer to the sin problem was, even though they had the sanctuary protocol. They got just steeped up in tradition, and so anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the base of it, right? It's kind of what you said, taking away the workers. They were, in some ways, him coming was taking away some people's livelihoods, because he was pointing out the hypocrisy and the priests and the people who were supposed to be the servants of God.
I don't know if he was taking away any of the livelihood, because certainly around in Jerusalem. Exactly.
So they're going, oh, Rabbi so-and-so must be wrong because this rabbi is telling me this, and this makes more sense.
It was
to me.
pride and ego. It was pride and ego that was in the way, of course. And that's the same thing happens today. And that's because of selfishness, self-centeredness. And but people get disgusted with that after a while. They when somebody's in charge, or in a place of authority, they think they need to tell you how. They think they need to legislate what's best, what we know is best for you. Well, you don't know what's best for me. You're not living in my shoes and my skin. So they try to do whatever the majority think need to be done, and a lot of times that's anti-Christian. That's against the will of God. And of course, they'll take it to the ultimate. When they legislate laws that go directly against God's commandments, they'll do that eventually. But for people that will have faith in what the Word says, they're going to end up. They are on the winning team, and they will end up receiving as a result. They'll end up receiving the gift of eternal life, with all that affords, and we can't even imagine all that provides, but it'll be certainly better than the alternative, and that'll be the wicked will be destroyed, and God will, start over. God, I mean, really, the scriptures are just about God's purging sin from His creation, and we're the sheep that strayed. You've heard the story of the 99. The 99 sheep entered the fold gate, but the one strayed away, the one lost sheep, and then the shepherd put his sheep in the sheepfold, secured them, and he went out looking for the one lost sheep. Well, we're the one lost sheep. We're the one lost planet. And
That's in Exodus, right?
Christ, that's actually in the New Testament. Story that one of the parables Jesus presented.
Yeah, you could almost see it in visual form during the Exodus. Just seeing the children of Israel being that lost sheep wandering through the wilderness, and God trying to
steer them in the right
direction.
Well, you had the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night that was leading them. Can't get any more direct than that.
Well, until God dwells among them.
Follow the cloud.
In a tent,
So, anyway, so we'll move into 2 Kings, and we're chapter 22 or 3.
23. Yeah, we kind of started on it, but Mom suggested at the end of last week that we would go back over it.
Okay.
It's about the Reformation that King Josiah brings about in the So
Right. And he, of course, well, maybe you'll give a little summary of how and when.
for
Or is that's a
which part
meeting
of
of
this?
23, isn't it?
how and when? Oh no, this is kind of jumping into the
Oh,
middle of
well,
the
you know,
reform.
he took the throne when he was 8.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he becomes like the king, quote unquote, when he was 8, and
Because his father,
When he was
Ammon,
yeah,
Ammon was assassinated, his father.
How
yeah.
many people was he ruling over?
So, well, that's the kind of cool thing was that when we looked at it, he doesn't really take charge until he's like 18,
Oh.
and so he's kind of like he's the king because he's the next in line.
He's,
But there's
he's
like-
the son of the king that was assassinated.
Yeah.
18, like my head would be spinning if I was like.
So you were
if
king
I
at
had That
18?
many people to tell what to do or whatever.
Different world, different culture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
don't
When
listen
you,
to me.
when you were 12,
Right.
when you were 12,
I don't know anything.
yeah, when you were 12, you were considered, you were entering into manhood when you were 12. But even as the king's son growing
Jewish
up,
culture, yeah.
you're going to be around
Counselors.
counselors and people. You're going to be around
diplomats.
the whole, yeah, you're going to be around the whole environment. And so, what is astounding though, the astounding thing, is that Ammon was a wicked king. He embraced all the negative that his father Zedekiah.
Manasseh.
That's right, it was Manasseh. Manasseh had taken the country into a very negative, evil direction, and then.
Yeah,
And
basically.
and of course he followed in Manasseh's footsteps. His son did, but then Josiah decides, at even an early age, wow, I see all this nastiness, and God had to be impressing him, of course. I don't want to go that direction, and so he started to implement reforms, particularly when he was 18.
But you know, a lot of that. So to just to kind of zip that in. A lot of that only comes as a result of him discovering the Old Testament.
Right.
Because apparently it's been lost. Yeah, Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy. It's been lost sight of for probably 50, 60 years since Hezekiah.
Right.
2 wicked kings later, you get to Josiah. So everything's become super corrupt. The church is basically full of pagan prostitutes and idolatry.
Heathenism,
Yeah, it's like steeped in all this
sacrificing
craziness,
children.
which you find when we read this chapter here.
Yeah.
Is kind of what tells you it was full of all that. But after they find the book of Deuteronomy, which is the law, they read it to him, and he has a really powerful reaction to hearing these words, and a conviction comes over him that he needs to do something. And so what we're reading about now is basically what he starts to enact as a result of
And see,
reading
during
through the law.
the reign of Hezekiah, that book was read every single day in public, out on like the town square.
Deuteronomy.
Every day they would have a reading, and that book would be read just to remind the people.
Here's what you're
where you come
accountable
from, who it is that you serve, what are his desires.
The Jews are really big on reminders and a lot of the different things like that. They were really big on all
Well, they
that.
did things like literally tying the little box to their forehead that had a scroll in it. I mean,
Right,
like they do.
exactly.
I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that, but they do it. They have like a cord that wraps all around their arm, and there's all these different things they do
To try to remind
that are supposed to be
Tassels
symbolic
that
of
they wear.
remembering scripture.
put things up on the door.
I've never seen that, but I grew up in New York, man. There's a lot of Jewish people in my neighborhood, so I know they do a lot of stuff that.
That's kind of out there, and you're like, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's cool to see when you look at the history, but so that being said, we can kind of dig into the beginning of this chapter and kind of start.
You can hit this if you want to follow along.
Where are we?
We are in 2 Kings.
I need something to drink.
So
Second Kings. That's
2 Kings 23.
Second Kings,
wow,
right?
that's
Yep.
pretty small print. Yep.
That's fine. I can read it.
Cool.
Second Kings, what?
23.
23.
Chapter 23.
23. Here we go. Okay.
Cool.
Josiah's Reformation.
Yep. So that's what we're reading about here. I'll get us started. And if there's anything that you want to mention or that anyone wants to talk about, just we can stop it and we can kind of talk about it, break it down.
I was just gonna say I feel like I'm spoiling the story because I'm only in Genesis right now.
Oh no, yeah, it's great.
I think you start from the very beginning.
So believe it or not, even from Genesis, you're not super far away from all of this.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, because Genesis glosses over a huge amount of history in a very short span. You know.
And the rest of them are like much smaller.
Well,
Period of time.
Genesis takes us up to the
To Abraham or Joseph, yeah.
The last 11
Man, we're all just like sitting here.
chapters.
But anyways,
I was laughing.
it's okay to get this because sometimes the really cool thing about reading the later stories is that it can add a lot of insight into the earlier stories where you can say, oh, this was a prophecy about this thing that happened.
Yeah.
It's all contextual for it too. It's really cool.
Yeah, I know this is not the kind of thing where like you have to read it in sequential order. You can read them in different orders if you want to, right?
Yeah, technically. It helps, like with Kings, it helps because it is pretty much chronological in like the Kings and what they're doing. Pretty much. It'll tell you the whole story and then it will backtrack and be like, and in the beginning of his reign. So it can get a little confusing that way, but but it's not too complicated. So verse 1 there, and the king sent, and they gathered unto him all of the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. And the king went up into the house of the Lord, and all the men of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem with him, and the priests and the prophets, and all the people, both small and great. And he read in their ears all the words of the book of the covenant, which was found in the house of the Lord. And the king stood by a pillar, and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord, and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes, with all their heart, soul, and with all their heart and all their soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book.
And see, that's the important thing is that the king did this. A person in leadership, a person that would set an example. That's what we don't have today. We don't have that example, and that's what's so tragic.
Well, and I think it's a really cool thing to note as well that it's also not just him, that he also recruits the help of the elders and all the other people, you know, all the other leadership.
That's
He
the next
basically
verse.
says, let's all get together.
The very next verse.
Which one? Verse 4?
All the people stood to the covenant.
Isn't that?
And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, and the priests of the second order, and the keepers of the door, to bring forth out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels that were made for Baal, and for the grove, and for all the host of heaven. And he burned them without Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried the ashes of them unto Bethel. So now that's just where this is kind of the first thing he starts to do. And that's another interesting note too, is that, you know, this whole thing, this cleansing, I guess is what you could call it, starts in
Or
the
dedication.
dedication.
Right.
Rededication.
Dedication leads to repentance and a complete clearing out of the junk.
And these ashes were probably from a red heifer, which is what they used for cleansing
Well,
processes. There.
well, this is supposed to be the ashes of the vessels and things made for Baal, right?
Yeah, that was carrying the ashes to
Oh, I
Bethel.
see. The vessels that were made for Baal, the groves.
Yeah. Yes, I mean this is and Bethel,
Took 'em
if
out
I'm
of
not
the
mistaken,
original
is basically where they're.
Exactly.
I
So
don't know. Is Bethel? I mean, Bethel was the
No.
town that Jesus loved to
Yeah,
stay
not
in.
Bethel. The
Hinnom was the
Hinnom.
burn- was the
Hinnom, okay,
burning
there we go.
area. But I think the indication here, the fields of Kidron, the brook Kidron was where all of the blood from the tabernacle, from the temple sacrifices would flow down into that brook and be washed out. And so that brook and the field around it and everything was pretty much a trashy area. It was where the people did
it
take
was a
their
dump.
garbage.
Yeah, it was a dump.
But he took the ashes away from Jerusalem, and even the remnants of the stuff of the pagans was taken away.
But in that dump, they put animal remains and also human remains. So they would just dump, everything in there. Let it decompose or whatever.
They didn't do human remains all that much. I mean, like the potter's field where they buried those that had no family.
They would take
or-
people that had been crucified. When they got to that place, they would even put people that had been crucified in there.
oh, that's right. Yeah. So verse 5, and he put down the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn with incense in the high
And
places.
he killed them.
in the
putting them
cities.
down. They didn't just say, you're a bad guy, you know. It wasn't a put down. They were actually killing them. They killed them off.
The animalistic sense of put down, I guess.
Yeah.
In Judah in the high places, and around about Jerusalem, them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the hosts of heaven.
Well, see, wouldn't you just think that you could go to somebody and say, hey, looky here, I know you're used to doing this, but you're going to have to stop doing it. If you don't stop, we're going to kill you. Execute. They might resist to the point of, you know, I'm not going to stop. You know, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Well, you know. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Mom?
I was looking up the history of the Kidron Valley because so much of this centers around that. And it says the Kidron Valley is also referred to as the Valley of Judgment and the Valley of Jehoshaphat.
Right.
And it's also a place where they had a cemetery. So it was a burial ground as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just was looking to see what they had to say about the history of the Kidron Valley because I had read some really interesting things about it in Desire of Ages at one point. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, well, the one thing I was going to say was, you know, I think one of the reasons that this, because when you read a lot of the other passages throughout the Bible, it does seem that for the most part, the expression is that God's long suffering, you know, like he tries his best to bring people out of these corrupt states and out of these things, but there's also like times when people's minds and hearts are just so far gone and depraved that there is no, you know, basically no humanity left, kind of thing. Because like these are people who were prostituting themselves in the temple and worshiping, you know, basically it seems like they were in the thralls of total paganism to the extent of them being referred to as sodomites later. You know?
Well, I think also another element that would crop up here would be that if you are coming and you're starting to tear down the groves and the altars and whatnot, you would get some resistance. People would try to stop you from doing that. And if these were, obviously this was commanded by the military. The military went and did this. Their military, or their priesthood ended up doing this. So you would get resistance, and in that resistance, you.
That's a good point too.
Yeah.
Cool. So verse 6, and he brought out the grove from the house of the Lord without Jerusalem unto the brook Kidron, and burned it at the brook Kidron, and stamped it small to powder, and cast the powder thereof upon the graves of the children of the people. And he brake down the houses of the Sodomites that were by the houses of the Lord, or the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the grove. And he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah, and defiled the high places where the priests had burned incense, from Geba to Beersheba, and brake down the high places of the gates that were in the entering in of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on the man's left hand at the gate of the city.
So this was pretty extensive. I mean, this was idolatry. Just it seems like just sprinkled throughout the whole place. And
Well, it looks like, but they brought all of the idolatry stuff into the temple, so he was pulling it all out.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's pretty extensive when you read through here all the things that they had to do.
I'm interested in the whole concept of the grove. You know, we think of a grove as a grove of trees, but these people made hangings. Women made hangings for these groves.
I was wondering what those
Maybe it
hangings
means
were.
something different than we think it does.
I was wondering what the significance of mentioning the hangings were.
Like what are those things?
Like the macrame hangings,
World
and
hangings?
and stuff.
Yeah, things of that nature. But also those things that are supposed to ward off evil spirits,
like
and
dream
stuff.
catchers and things like
Dream catchers,
that.
Yeah, that kind of thing. That's what I was thinking of.
looking up various references to it, because it's one of those things that it's a term we don't use necessarily the same way they did.
I mean, it really doesn't matter. I mean, you could tie your shoelaces together and throw your old boots up there, and if you decided to worship them, you know, that's the thing that's the inappropriate thing. It doesn't matter what's up there; it's that you're worshiping it, kind of.
Well, this says that New Bible versions eliminate the word grove, and it's plural from the Bible when it deals with idolatry, and they replace this easily understood word with Asherah pole, sacred pole, and wooden image. It says the New Age spiral goddess worshippers talk about their grove of remembrance, or a rainbow heart grove, a green man grove, not their Asherah poles. And even the followers of Wicca don't use terminology like that. They refer to God's grove. So grove is a term very popular in paganism.
Or kind of like I guess kind of like in my head, I imagine kind of like a tiki pole almost, like a totem pole, that kind of thing.
That could be
absolutely.
So that kind of
because
thinking.
most of the pagan cultures that exist even today, especially over in Asia, they have totem poles. You know, poles carved to look. And I guess they would take a tree and carve it to look. Oh, let me in 2016.
Let me in 2016. Okay.
Take me back to the good old
I
years.
just put this out for the internet for all the world to hear that our password.
Yeah, if anybody wants to drive by the house and
Get the Wi-Fi real quick.
Yeah.
Hackers, that's an invitation.
right.
Especially since I can't figure out how to log in there and change it. We wanted to at one point, couldn't find a way to change it. So that's how old that password is.
At least 2016.
I think Jeremy said it, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time he comes over, I'll get him to do it. So apparently they would make these groves, but were more like statues,
Yeah.
much like we would see in a museum.
Or in a Roman Catholic church.
Oh, yes.
Huh.
So apparently they would have like places where you could worship and burn incense in front of them, or candles,
Okay.
or whatever. And these women making hangings for them would be like making decorations to put on them or to embellish them.
The Christmas tree.
That might be part of the history.
Maybe that's where we get some of the Christmas tree from.
The decorations on the tree.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have
But it's separate. The Bible
too
separates
many people
images and
worshiping that
groves.
today.
Yeah,
And
I
it
was
says
telling you
cut
about that,
down
actually.
their grove. So it almost sounds like this was a planted garden tribute
Sure.
to a pagan god.
Absolutely.
What were you saying?
Remember that mushroom I told you about earlier? People used to take for a sacrament. It's considered a drug today, but it looks like a Super Mario mushroom. It's red, white. It's called Amanita muscaria, and I was telling him a lot of really disgusting things about it. But one of the things that it's interesting you guys brought that up. One of the things they do that I was going to tell them about earlier is they used to dry it by leaving it hanging on pine trees upside down, and they were trying to say that that's one of the places where that might have come from.
The history of the Christmas ornament
Yeah.
was when people would see Christmas ornaments everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You're like, dude. Look at
Christmas. That's pretty wacky.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to consider how much of the stuff we have in society today that is just bleed through from old pagan practices and old things that people used to do.
Sure.
Of course, it's pretty well established, things like the Christmas tree and things like that having pagan roots. So
Easter.
even like the steeples on churches and things like that, and pagan temples.
But of course nowadays
obelisks,
Right.
you have so many other things that you can put before God.
Mhm.
You know, your job, your work, your singing,
Your family, your health, whatever.
Right,
you know.
and so anything can
Your
be
time.
idolized. Your car, your job, just anything that you do practically. Could be, if you don't have the right perspective about things. God's up there saying, why worship this tree? When I'm the one that made the tree.
Mhm.
Worship, I'm the true God. I made your tree. I gave you the ability and the talent to do what you're doing there, to sculpt and to create, and yet you worship the created, not the creator.
This is kind of interesting, and it kind of explains where we get some of the things that we see in the modern world. It says the word grove makes reference to the wooden symbols of the female Canaanite deity Asherah. In the King James Version, grove is an incorrect rendering of two Hebrew words, Asherah, the Canaanite goddess, a wooden idol generally set up beside the altars of Baal, and Eshel, the tamarisk tree. New American Standard Bible does a good job of correcting this mistranslation. The wooden symbols were phallic in shape and involved sexual licentiousness.
Sure.
Oh,
So they would make these things, and I was thinking about, there's one place in
Thailand or
one of them that has
Oh,
an
yeah.
entire
Vietnam or
garden where
something
they
like
have
that.
these. It's
phallics.
it's called a penis garden, and
Yeah.
it's just all these statues. They have faces, they have
Yeah.
decorations.
It's,
on them
it's in
and
like
stuff.
Thailand, I think.
Yeah, and it's just one of these things.
It's an
that-
island. It's an entire island they dedicated to
Yeah,
it. Yeah, it's
yeah.
an entire
You know,
phallic island.
Yeah.
They
It's
did
pretty
the
weird.
symbols of the zodiac in those things. I mean, it's like they took that symbol
Yeah.
and made it into whatever things that they found interesting in life, and
Well,
had
many
this
cultures-
whole garden of nothing but
even
that.
today worship the phallus. I mean, I know there's still cultures in Africa that do and things like that. I mean,
Mhm.
Well, the obelisk
You know.
is supposed to be a phallic symbol.
yeah,
And
phallus
they
of
would,
Baal.
they would put that up in a high place so that from a distance you would know where the temple to Baal was.
Baal was a little happy today.
Every day.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and there was all sorts of things like that
It's
too.
just strange to think that a group of people would take one thing like this and create idols and decorate them and make this kind
Yeah.
of
Well, and the
thing
whole
up.
purpose was to basically take any focus or adoration from God and place it somehow on the human, and even the perverse.
Susan says
Diversity
many of the
humanity.
native groups in our province of Canada carve various images on a totem pole, usually bird or eagle or animal images. And usually they are in high places but have spiritual significance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, Walter Veith did a presentation about how at like Roman Catholic cathedrals, like major ones, that all of them have these different aspects of like the obelisk and the church building, and they're all on ancient pagan sites.
Right.
And one of the things that he pointed out that just I remembered was the one there at the Vatican, and there's a certain time of year that the shadow of the obelisk enters the door of the church,
Right.
and so it was like supposed to be a symbolic
Right.
gesture, of
Nasty.
course. I
And
mean,
of
but
course,
I'm
much
saying
of
that's
what
the
happened-
roots
much
of
of what
paganism.
happened in the early Christian church as it became the Roman Catholic Church was that they took the images and idols of the pagans, gave them
Incorporated
Christian
them,
names,
right.
and brought them into the church.
You are no longer Dagon, fish god. You are Peter, fisher of men.
Yeah.
You know?
And they thought they were doing something great because that would encourage the pagans to come to church. But what they ended up with was a bunch of paganized Christians who had no sense of reference for Scripture or for God anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now they began to worship these creations rather than the Creator.
Yeah. Yes, that's pretty interesting connections there. Verse 9. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places came not up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they did eat of the unleavened bread among their brethren. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing too, is that he basically tells them, like, you're not allowed to be priests in this temple anymore.
Right.
You know, because of the corruption that you guys have
If you've
been
taken
privy
part
to.
in this, you've lost your calling.
Yeah, but he still allows them to receive their portion that God had promised them that they would basically be taken care of out of, you know. So, like, it's interesting to see that God still honors that arrangement in that situation, but that Josiah does see fit to tell them, like, we don't want you worship, like, you know, you aren't fit to be leaders
Couldn't
in
trust
this
them
church.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tongue twister you don't hear every day. Unleavened bread amongst their brethren. Try to say that 20 times fast.
Unleavened bread amongst their brethren. Yeah. And this was kind of an interesting thing too. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the children of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. Of course, that's what you were talking about earlier as well, Dad. And
So he broke down all those images where they used to sacrifice children in the altars and destroyed them completely so that nobody could do anything with them.
That's right. Let's take out those clinics.
Right. Well, and I was reading that one of the things, it's not necessarily guaranteed, but it says that the rabbis say that Topheth had its name from Toth, which means a drum. And he said because an instrument of
Drumming festivals.
this kind was
Yeah.
used to drown out the cries of the children that were put in the burning arms of Molech to be scorched to death. And so that's just I mean, it's a really sad history, but I found it interesting nonetheless that name would take enough of a root to be like, oh yeah, like that's
It is. It's just sad to think that human beings could reach the place where they would kill
Think-
other human beings
think
and think
that
that they're getting some blessing
Some
from
blessing
deity.
from doing that, yeah, some benefit.
Sacrifice.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, and of course Hinnom is what we were saying earlier. That's the place where they burn trash, right? So this was a place where they were already doing burning stuff, and I think they just probably added their altars there, and it's awful, but that's the history.
And to think that God's people were doing this. It isn't just that the pagans who and many of them among the priests who were teaching the Bible or teaching the Torah were doing these
And the
things.
thing of it is, because it's the dump, it's not a place that you frequent all the time. You don't say, hey, let's go have a picnic today over at Hinnom.
Over in Hinnom.
You don't do that. So to go there meant you were going there to do one thing.
Throw away stuff.
This is an article about Tophet. It says one of the rituals of the Phoenician religion was to sacrifice humans, especially children. The victims were killed by fire, although it is not clear precisely how. But according to ancient historians Plutarch and Diodorus, a hearth was set before a bronze statue of the god Baal, or El, who had outstretched arms on which the victim was placed before falling into the fire. This they also mentioned the victims wearing a smiling mask to hide their tears from the god to whom they were being offered. The victims' ashes were then placed in an urn and buried in tombs placed within a dedicated sacred open space surrounded by walls called the Tophet.
Yeah, and see today.
So it was like a columbarium, I think they call it today. It was like a wall that had places for these
Like
urns
down
to be put
boxes
in
and
there.
things.
Yeah.
Wow.
And see today, the doctors don't even have to look at the faces of the ones that they abort. They just,
And it says many of the stelae in the area have an inscription which describes a human blood sacrifice or the substitution of a sheep for a child. And the urns themselves were often recycled pots and jars from as far afield as Corinth and Egypt to provide an interesting and valuable record of Phoenician trade. Just think about it. They decorated their walls with the remains of the children they'd sacrificed. Just sad.
I mean, that's got to do something to your psyche.
Apparently in the Phoenician area.
Well, I mean, and you can see why God starts to have enough,
Oh yeah, he obviously
Enough of what's going
fed
on.
up.
It says the most famous Tophet is at Carthage, also known as the precinct of Tanit, located south of the city. It was first used in the 8th century BCE and continuously thereafter until the fall of Carthage in the Punic Wars. At its largest extent, it covered 6,000 square meters and had 9 descending levels. So these were very sophisticated,
Chambers and places.
decorated places, special buildings and special construction was made for all of these things, as though somehow this was all going to bring them.
Prosperity and
I just gotta wonder how
Things
somebody
they
can
wanted.
get that far away from sanity and
Well, you-
still be living.
Well, and I'd mentioned this a while back, was that I see a lot of this stuff just being a corruption of things that God
Set up.
set up. Like that, well, you don't have to sacrifice a child, you can sacrifice a lamb. Like really goes, and that's an interesting way of thinking how they may have integrated the Judahites into doing it.
Right.
It was like, oh yeah, just bring your offerings here. Like you guys already do it, just bring the lamb here. And then they're like, oh, you can bring children here too. Like I don't know how that works. But I mean, I think that's so. Oh, I should. Yeah, oh, great. Yeah. So I think that's one way that they might have integrated them in, but also just the corruption of the idea of the sacrificial service being that God would offer His Son, and then so people
goes
think
back
I
to
need to offer
selfishness.
my son.
This says here that the scale of human sacrifice carried out by them is difficult to determine, but unlikely to have been performed with great regularity because no society can, after all, sustain a regular culling of its own population. All of the literary references to the human sacrifice suggest it was necessary only in times of great danger to the state, such as wars, plagues, natural. The god sacrifices his son to save his country from collapse. They said that it was just done during times of emergency, and human sacrifices in ancient sources were almost always the children of rulers and the ruling class, as the gods apparently were not moved by the sacrifices of the common people.
No.
Well, you know,
That kind of gives you a little perspective.
we actually
on it.
see that from one of the earlier stories we read when
The king hung his
the king killed his own son on the wall
hung him out there
and sacrificed him to whatever to
to
Baal.
try to abate.
But it
But
says
you know
the
that you just-
archaeological record has revealed a large number of funerary urns as Tophets, over 20,000 of them at Carthage alone.
Wow.
The thing of it is,
And
it
the
just
majority containing the burnt remains of children.
one is too many. But I mean, it's the mindset to think that the God who created those children would demand them to be put through fire as some kind of offering to appease him. I mean, it was all about really gaining some advantage, gaining some blessing, you know, which is a self-centered type thing. Even an advantage of, hey, you know, we want the gods to be with us when we go out to war, you know. Okay, so they deserve a sacrifice.
And Susan
It's
says
all
it's a sign of
self-centeredness.
how depraved a mind can become without the guiding of the Holy Spirit and the self-control that God requires of us. But she said it's interesting that in those Catholic churches where they have those images, almost every one of those cathedrals have a body part of a dead saint in the altar,
Right.
Hmm.
where they venerate the dead.
Sure.
So even there we see that, you know, even in the Christian church in the early years, they came to think that practice was acceptable, because that's what the nations around them did. You know, once again, when you have a people that are looking horizontally and not vertically,
Mm.
they're not using God as their standard, they're comparing themselves to everybody else.
Right.
That's why Israel clamored for a king. Make us like the other nations around us.
Absolutely.
They were always looking around them and not looking up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
Yes, I mean, it's funny to think about that too, that everything we're reading about right now is really the result of them complaining back in Judges.
Mm-hmm.
and for Samuel being like, all right, but let me tell you, they're
This
going
is
to
what's
oppress
going to
you,
happen.
they're going to steal from you, they're going to tax you, they're going to take your children for their own, they're going to do all these horrible things. Do you still want a king?
You.
Yes, give us a king. Okay, you know.
They got what they asked for.
Yeah.
So you pay for what you get, and you get what you pay for.
We're experiencing the very same today.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's the interesting thing, of course, is to see that this history repeats itself.
Yeah.
And that we have, you know, people in leadership who are seeking to abolish these kinds
I
of
mean,
practices.
we've allowed our politicians to run roughshod over our
Heads being cut
lives
off.
as a society, so we're experiencing the very same thing.
Right now,
We're getting what we deserve by ignoring what they've been doing for 50 years or more.
Yeah. Yeah, so going on there, verse 11. And he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had given to the sun at the entering in of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Nethamelech, the chamberlain, which was in the suburbs, and burned the chariots of the
Suburbs, huh?
sun with fire. Yeah, suburbs. And the altars that were on the top of the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars which Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, did the king beat down and break them down from thence, and cast the dust of them into the brook Kidron. And the high places that were before Jerusalem, which were on the right hand of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon the king of Israel had builded for Ashtoreth, Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Zidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the children of Ammon, did the king defile.
And they were the two offspring of Lot's daughters,
Mhm.
the Ammonites and the Moabites.
Yeah. And he brake in pieces the images and cut down the groves and filled their places with the bones of men. And I read that was
So that's where it became a cemetery.
well. That was how they defiled places that were considered sacred. Was they just like put dead bodies there and just like bury them and be like, this place.
Because the Jews knew that anybody that
desacrified.
touched a dead body was defiled.
Yeah.
So you had a body out there in that field, you didn't mess with it. You didn't do anything.
Well, also it's interesting that even though we had some good kings prior to Josiah, Josiah is the first one to destroy Solomon's altars,
Right.
statues to these gods.
Yeah.
And you had Hezekiah and Jehu and different people
Who all put up
who
with
were-
those things.
who did different
That's the
aspects
high
of
places.
this. But Josiah is the only one who went this far.
Right.
Pretty extensive when you look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, he not only tore them down, he burned them or crushed them to powder and,
Cast them into
you
the.
know, it's like, I'm going to make sure this can never come back
Right,
here.
because we don't want the next administration to stick them back up, which is typically
We
what
want to
happens.
stick them in a storage house somewhere. And obviously these things probably had a lot of gold and jewels and things because they decorated them to honor their gods. And he destroyed all of that.
Yeah.
That's probably why nobody destroyed them before, because they were beautiful to look at and probably very decorative.
You
He
know,
said-
masterful pieces of
And he
artwork
said,
to some degree.
this
I'm sure.
belongs to the heathen, it's going. He destroyed them all.
Yeah, I mean, which is what what Deuteronomy essentially says to do. That like you're not going to have any of this stuff in your midst. So I mean, at the very least, he is honoring what he is convicted to do.
He's getting rid of stuff that's pretty old.
Very old. I mean,
If you read the
Solomon's.
next verse.
I'm sure the
Solomon's what,
Historical Society was all
Oh,
upset with
absolutely, they were all over him.
Because I mean, those things would have been because Solomon's like about 300 years
right?
before Josiah. So these things have been around for a
We want the
while.
people today tearing down our Civil War monuments and statues and things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like that, So it's kind of wild to think about how that must have felt to be in that culture and in that time, seeing all this stuff happening around you so dramatically. So moreover, verse 15, the altar that was at Bethel and the high place with Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, had made both that altar and the high place he brake down, and burned the high place, and stamped it small to powder, and burned the grove. And as Josiah turned himself, he espied the sepulchres that were there in the mount, and sent and took the bones out of the sepulchre, and burned them upon the altar, and polluted it, according to the word of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these words. Then he said, what title is that I see? Or like, whose name is that? And the men of the city told him, it is the sepulchre of the man of God, which came from Judah, and proclaimed these things that thou hast done against the altar of Bethel. And he said, let him alone, let no man move his bones. So they let his bones alone with the bones of the prophet that came out of Samaria. Now, what's really cool about that is we didn't actually read this because we started at the stories of Elijah and Ahab and things like that. But this actually goes back to a prophecy that was given to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Let me see if I can find that real quick. It's
I think the
somewhere.
grove a name like Nebat.
I'm sure it's pronounced differently in their tongue, but
Susan said, isn't it amazing that Solomon, the wisest of men, set up such idols?
yeah.
Women.
Of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name,
Wow.
and upon thee shall he offer the priests of the high places that burnt incense upon thee, and the men's bones shall be burnt upon thee.
So it's a prophecy coming true.
Yeah,
And he named
it's a 300-year-old prophecy about King Josiah. So it's kind of and it named him by name. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. And then he gave a sign and so on. But Jeroboam has this prophet killed, of course. So has him killed, and then he has his bones like discarded in the sepulcher, where he's like, you won't get any sort of honorable burial or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting connection as well.
Wow, he was a very extensive reformer.
Yeah. We'll just finish out this section and kind of catch up to where I guess.
19.
Yeah. And all of the houses also of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke the Lord, according to all the acts that he had done in Bethel. And he slew all the priests of the high places that were upon the altars, and burned men's bones upon them, and returned to Jerusalem. That's interesting too, because the people who he's asking about what man's sepulcher this is, despite it being hundreds of years after the fact, they're familiar with the prophecy. And they're like, oh, like, you're the fulfillment of this prophecy. And this was what he prophesied, and you're doing exactly what he said you were going to do.
Yeah. That would make you think twice about not doing what he wanted you to do.
But yeah. And the king commanded, verse 21, and the king commanded all the people, saying, Keep the Passover unto the Lord your God, as it is written in the book of this covenant. Surely there was not holden such a Passover from the days of the judges that judged in Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel, nor of all the kings of Judah, but in the 18th year of King Josiah, wherein this Passover was holden to the Lord in Jerusalem.
So now we get a sense of what time of year this reform took place. And what happens before the Passover?
Is it?
Well, you have the Passover, but you have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And what
Yeah.
do they do to prepare for the Passover?
They throw out
They
all
cleanse
the
the
leaven.
house.
Oh yeah, they clean everything.
They clean all of the leaven, which is a representative of sin, so they clean all of the sinful things out.
So he's cleaning.
So
the
here he is just
house
before
of
the
Israel.
Passover,
He's just
cleaning the house of
this-
Israel of all the trash.
all the sin.
Well, do we want to conclude there for the day, or do we want to go ahead and finish this out to where it gets to his son?
That's
That's kind of a bit
That's
more.
pretty good.
Quite a bit.
Let's finish
Yeah,
it.
we can end on Passover. Cool. Yeah. So lots of really interesting information in this. I figured it would take us a little while to get through this because
It's a lot.
he's one of the most prominent
Well,
kings
that's
of
the good thing
Israel.
about doing this is that we're not in a hurry. We're not on a schedule that we have to finish it by a certain time. We just read it until we feel like
And
we're
then,
at
you
a
know, the
good
things you
stopping
brought up
spot.
there, that may have been his very plan. Passover's coming up, you know, we're gonna clean the house.
Well, if he had
before-
been reading the book of the law, he knew
Yeah.
that that was the preparation.
Mhm.
Whenever God instituted a reform, he told the children of Israel, take off your jewelry, put away the sin that's in your midst,
Right.
clean your houses, all
Yeah,
of you.
Absolutely.
And that was all part of the preparation.
Make your hearts ready. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's actually what I was kind of gathering as I was reading about the reform. Just not even getting to the part about when with Passover and all that. It just seems like such a thing that would happen around that time.
And for some people, for a segment of people in this, during what was happening here, they had to be traumatized. And
Sure.
other people had to be relieved.
Right.
So you had this.
Some
one
people were
seg-
probably
you had
like,
one
"Finally."
One segment were probably saying, finally we have somebody do it. And then the other people were probably traumatized because of all the change and the nonsense that they were used to.
Well, it was also the fact that in their minds, many of these things were very valuable because they weren't just wooden statues.
Yeah, and
They
here's the
were
king
covered with
destroying-
gold and precious stones and
Yeah.
decorated, and they were historical. So there were these people that valued all of these material things, plus whatever supernatural events had gone along with them. Because we forget there's a supernatural element that keeps these things going. If they didn't get some
in
kind
the swamp.
Yep.
Well, that's why
This is an
That's why I
ancient
say-
granite swamp.
it is interesting to see the parallels happening and taking place. That we have all this, good king, bad king, good king, bad king stuff, even in our own history, and we can see where many of our different leaders have taken us way far down,
Sure.
and whether
And why,
you can.
why have we allowed it? That's the question. We've been too busy, too distracted to not notice all the corruption. I mean, you got Biden being part of a whole crime family for the last 40 plus years.
And then you've got the Clintons, you've got the Obamas,
And the
you've got the
Bushes.
Bushes. I mean, they
sure.
were all
It's just
crime
everybody's
families, all
right,
of them.
exactly. So
I mean,
they
even
could
the
be wrong.
Kennedys, I mean,
Yeah, Kennedys, I mean, just-
powerful people tend to have some powerful corrupt connection
Right.
because you
Yeah.
don't get to be to that place without stepping on some people or
So somebody like
scratching a
Trump
few
is,
backs.
Trump is
A high position of power.
Trump is a modern day Josiah.
I mean, it depends. Some people can get their respect alone. Some people just. I mean, look at. President, you don't have to step on anybody necessarily. I mean, of course, you got a bunch of corrupt politicians, and quite frankly, I doubt that a lot of them were really good presidents. That really weren't doing anything corrupt behind the scenes. But
Yeah.
you can definitely do it. It's definitely doable. It's just not very common.
Yeah, that would probably be a better way of expressing that point then.
Yeah.
It's just the thing because it's like it's what you see more of. Like you see more people that are there for some questionable reason than you see people who got there because they were just smart or like.
Yeah, well, I mean,
good
it's the fact that it's so
people.
common and that it's much easier to get into power from corruption than it is to get into power respectively. And that's just the truth of how it works. It's so much easier to blackmail somebody to get into power than it is to actually become somebody of power and influence.
Well, that's the difference between, I mean, fighting dark, Jesus,
Yeah.
and the devil, whatever. It's all
Somebody who
the
has
same.
power and somebody who fakes having power, basically.
Well, that, and it's also the whole, I was going to say it earlier, the immediate gratification thing, getting pain before pleasure or pleasure before pain,
Getting it
That's
right
how-
now instead of later.
Yeah,
That's an interesting point too. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, then we'll close out, and then we'll continue our lively discussion, I'm sure.
Always more to talk about.
Oh yeah, there's tons. All right, Lord, thank you so much for a time to come together to look at the things that you've left for us and to try to understand them better. Ask that as we think throughout the day about them, that you would help continue to give us insight and to enlighten us about these awesome and interesting stories, and that through them you might show us what it is you want us to do, what our purpose is in this life, and that you would help us to conform ourselves more to the image of your Son, that we would be more like Jesus in character, heart, and mind, and that in every aspect we can, we would just seek to be more like him. And we thank you for all the wonderful company and the things that we've gotten to talk about, and ask that you continue these things into the next week as well. These we ask in the name of your Son. Amen.
True Sabbath blessing, and I hope you have a great week to come. And we'll see you here next time, homechurch.us. God bless everyone.
All right, I'm going to pee.
We won't stop
It's
you.
all you.
It's, that way to the right.
Right over here.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hope that didn't get on the record.